The Blackwood estate had once been celebrated as the brightest jewel in the kingdom, where music drifted through marble halls and laughter echoed beneath painted ceilings. Now silence ruled every corridor like an unwelcome monarch. Heavy curtains dimmed the sunlight, servants lowered their voices without thinking, and every clock seemed to tick louder than it should, reminding everyone that 6 years had passed since Duchess Isabella Blackwood had died, bringing twin sons into the world. Her absence lingered like perfume trapped within old stone, impossible to erase and painful to remember. Duke Adrian Blackwood carried his grief with the rigid discipline of a soldier. At 38, he remained admired across the kingdom for his fairness, intelligence, and unwavering devotion to duty, yet the warmth that once defined him had vanished with his wife. His broad shoulders still bore embroidered velvet cloaks and ceremonial medals, but beneath every elegant garment rested a weary heart convinced that happiness belonged to another lifetime. Every morning he fulfilled his obligations to the duchy, then returned before sunset to the nursery where hope seemed to disappear behind 2 pairs of sightless eyes. Leo and Lucian, identical in appearance and inseparable in spirit, had entered life beneath tragedy's shadow. Though physicians insisted they were completely blind, the boys possessed uncanny awareness. They recognized every servant by footsteps alone, sensed fear before a single word was spoken, and often turned smiling faces toward empty corners where no one appeared to stand. Most unsettling of all, they whispered gentle conversations every night with someone no one else could hear. 3 nurses had resigned within a single week. The first fled after claiming she awoke to find both boys standing beside an empty rocking chair, softly saying good night to their mother. The second refused another sunset after hearing a lullaby floating through the nursery despite every window being shut. The third packed her belongings before dawn, trembling as she insisted tiny fingerprints had appeared across the dusty nursery mirror beside a larger handprint that belonged to no living soul. Adrian dismissed every tale as frightened imagination, but each departure deepened his frustration. His sons deserved tenderness, not superstition. Yet no caretaker remained long enough to earn the children's trust. The twins rejected everyone with silent tears and fearful withdrawal, retreating into themselves whenever unfamiliar hands reached toward them. Lady Seraphine observed every failure with carefully concealed satisfaction. Elegant, graceful, and endlessly sympathetic before the court, Adrian's widowed cousin never missed an opportunity to comfort him publicly while quietly planting seeds of despair. She insisted the boy's condition would never improve and gently suggested that perhaps distant boarding institutions specialized in children like them. Adrian always refused, though exhaustion weakened his certainty more each passing month. Unknown to him, Seraphine welcomed every hopeless day. If the heirs remained frail and dependent, influence over Blackwood's future would gradually slip into her capable hands. Each afternoon Dr. Victor Hale arrived carrying polished leather cases filled with medicines. The royal physician enjoyed unquestioned respect after years of loyal service. He examined the twins with practiced concern, administered bitter eye drops, and assured Adrian that blindness often worsened before any miracle appeared. Desperate for answers, the Duke believed every measured explanation, never noticing the fleeting glance exchanged between Hale and Seraphine whenever treatment ended. By week's end, the palace steward approached Adrian outside the library wearing an expression balanced between embarrassment and determination. "My lord," he said carefully, "one final applicant remains." Adrian closed the estate ledger before him. "Does she possess experience?" "Very little." "References?" "None worthy of mention." The Duke sighed. "Then why recommend her?" The elderly steward hesitated before answering. "Because despite every weakness, she may possess exactly what your sons need." Moments later the great doors opened. A young woman stepped quietly inside wearing a faded brown dress patched at the sleeves. Her boots carried traces of country roads rather than palace corridors. A cream-colored bonnet framed gentle features untouched by vanity. Though plainly dressed, she held herself with quiet dignity that neither poverty nor hardship had managed to steal. She lowered her eyes respectfully. The steward introduced her. "Ilara Ashcroft." She answered only with a graceful bow. "She cannot speak," the steward explained softly. Her voice was lost years ago after surviving a terrible fire. Several servants exchanged awkward smiles. One stable master muttered under his breath, "Well, at least she cannot frighten the children with ghost stories." Scattered laughter rippled through the room. Ilara neither flinched nor defended herself. Instead, she simply folded trembling hands before her apron and waited with remarkable patience. Something about her calm unsettled Adrian more than nervous explanations ever could. He studied her thoughtful eyes, sensing old sorrow hidden beneath extraordinary composure. Without another word he nodded. "You may begin today." The nursery door opened slowly. Leo and Lucian paused in the middle of the carpet, tiny heads lifting toward unfamiliar footsteps. Every servant expected the usual cries. Instead, the twins walked forward together with astonishing confidence. Elara instinctively knelt before either child could stumble. Neither boy reached uncertainly. Each lifted small hands directly to her face as though following an invisible map. Leo's fingertips rested gently against her cheek. Lucian touched the other. For one endless heartbeat the room stood perfectly still. Then Leo smiled with peaceful certainty. "Mama's heart." Lucian breathed deeply, his expression softening. "It feels warm." The words struck every listener like thunder. Tears instantly filled Elara's eyes. She pressed trembling fingers against the twins' small hands, fighting emotions too powerful to reveal. Adrian stared in speechless disbelief. His sons had rejected every caretaker since birth. Yet within moments they clung to this silent stranger as though greeting someone they had loved forever. That evening, while darkness settled gently over Blackwood Palace, Adrian stood outside the nursery expecting the familiar sounds of frightened sobs, restless footsteps, and desperate cries. None came. Hours passed beneath quiet candlelight. When he finally eased the door open before dawn, both boys slept peacefully with contented smiles upon their faces. Beside their bed sat Elara, watching over them with endless devotion. Resting within her loosely clasped hands, half hidden beneath the folds of her apron, glimmered a sapphire pendant Adrian recognized instantly, the very necklace buried with his beloved Isabella, or so everyone had believed until that impossible, breathtaking moment. Morning sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, scattering gentle pools of color across the nursery floor. Leo and Lucian could not see the crimson, sapphire, and gold dancing around them, yet they laughed as warmth shifted across their bare feet. Elara smiled quietly, dipping her fingers into the colorful light before guiding the boys' hands into the same glowing patches. Though they could not witness the colors with their eyes, they felt the warmth and listened as birds sang beyond the open window, discovering that beauty was never limited to sight alone. From that morning forward, the nursery changed. Rather than treating it as a place of confinement, Elara transformed it into a sanctuary of discovery. Every evening she lit a single candle before sunset. Its flame illuminated the walls for herself, but its true purpose was peace. The gentle crackle of burning wax became the signal that stories were about to begin. Unable to speak, she communicated with graceful hands, expressive eyes, soft smiles, and delicate shadow puppets dancing across the stone walls. A fluttering bird emerged from her fingers. A soaring dragon followed. Then came rabbits, deer, butterflies, and graceful swans, each moving with astonishing elegance beneath the flickering candlelight. Leo and Lucian sat perfectly still, their faces lifted toward sounds they could not explain. They traced the changing shadows across the wall with curious fingertips, feeling warmth from the candle and imagining entire kingdoms inside their minds. For the first time, bedtime became their favorite hour. Instead of fearing darkness, they began waiting eagerly for it. Each sunrise introduced another lesson. Elara led them into the palace gardens before the servants disturbed the morning dew. Removing their shoes, she encouraged them to walk slowly across cool grass. They laughed as tiny droplets slipped between their toes. She knelt beside blooming roses, lavender, jasmine, and lilies, placing each flower beneath their noses until they could distinguish every fragrance without hesitation. Soon Leo identified lavender before reaching it. Lucian recognized roses while standing several steps away. The gardens gradually unfolded inside their memories, becoming invisible maps composed entirely of scent. On another morning she guided them toward the palace fountain. Instead of describing the water, she let their fingers drift through its cool currents. She helped them notice how nearby echoes changed depending upon where they stood. Before long the twins could locate every fountain in the estate without assistance, following nothing but the music of flowing water. Rain arrived one afternoon with rolling thunder. Servants hurried indoors, afraid the boys would become frightened. Instead, Elara opened the garden doors. She stretched both hands into the falling rain. After a moment's hesitation, Leo copied her. Cold drops splashed across his palms. His face brightened with astonishment. Lucian followed, laughing as rain soaked his hair and trickled down his cheeks. Together they spun beneath dark clouds while Elara laughed silently beside them, her joy shining brighter than words ever could. From an upstairs balcony, Adrian watched without interrupting. He realized he had spent years trying to shield his sons from disappointment. Elara was teaching them courage instead. Days became weeks. The palace slowly transformed alongside the children. The kitchen staff welcomed the twins every afternoon. Flour covered their sleeves as they kneaded bread beside elderly bakers who patiently taught them every movement. Leo learned dough by texture. Lucian judged readiness by scent alone. Warm loaves emerged from the ovens, filling every hallway with comforting aromas that reminded even the oldest servants of forgotten childhoods. In the royal stables, frightened horses lowered their heads whenever the boys approached. Elara showed them how to breathe calmly before touching each animal. Soon the nervous stallions recognized the twins' gentle hands, standing perfectly still while little fingers brushed glossy manes. The palace guards began greeting them proudly. Housemaids smiled instead of whispering. Gardeners prepared fragrant pathways especially for morning walks. Laughter gradually replaced mourning throughout Blackwood Manor. Only one heart hardened. Lady Seraphine observed every improvement with growing resentment. She noticed servants speaking hopefully again. She saw Adrian lingering longer beside his sons. Most dangerous of all, she witnessed the children becoming independent. One evening she confronted Dr. Victor Hale in a deserted corridor. "They are changing," she whispered sharply. "They laugh. They explore. They no longer fear the world." Victor frowned uneasily. "The medicine continues working." "It must work faster," Seraphine replied coldly. "No one must suspect they were ever capable of more." Victor hesitated only briefly before nodding. The following morning he arrived carrying another polished case. Adrian watched as the physician carefully placed fresh drops into each child's eyes. Leo blinked painfully. Lucian winced but remained silent. Elara's gentle smile disappeared. Though unable to speak, her worried expression lingered upon the medicine bottle longer than anyone noticed. Something deep within her refused to trust it. She quietly wiped away excess drops with a clean cloth after Victor departed. That evening Adrian found himself wandering the palace long after midnight. Curiosity drew him toward the nursery once more. Remembering forgotten servant passages from childhood games, he discovered a narrow corridor concealed behind carved wooden panels. Dust covered the hidden walkway, untouched for decades. Through a tiny opening between the stones, he could see the entire nursery without being observed. Inside, only one candle burned. Elara sat upon the floor. Leo and Lucian rested beside her. No voices disturbed the silence. Only the gentle crackling flame and distant rain against stained glass windows accompanied their quiet gathering. Elara lifted her hands. Another story unfolded through dancing shadows. A mother bird sheltered two tiny chicks beneath wide wings while storms raged beyond their nest. The twins reached toward the moving silhouettes, smiling as though they understood every unspoken word. When the story ended, something unexpected happened. Both boys slowly stood. Without guidance, they turned toward an empty rocking chair resting beside the window. Together they knelt. Neither appeared frightened. Instead, peaceful smiles crossed their faces. Elara's eyes filled with tears. She bowed her head toward the same empty chair. Adrian felt every hair rise along his arms. The room remained perfectly still. No breeze stirred the curtains. The windows were tightly closed. Yet the candle flame suddenly leaned toward the rocking chair, stretching almost horizontally without flickering out. At that exact moment, a delicate fragrance drifted through the nursery. White roses. Isabella's favorite flowers. The same scent Adrian had not encountered since the day she died. His breath caught painfully inside his chest. Logic urged him to look away. His heart refused. Slowly, Elara lifted her face. Instead of looking toward the twins, she gazed directly at the hidden wall where Adrian stood concealed within darkness. For one impossible moment, her tear-filled eyes settled upon the narrow crack between the stones with quiet certainty, as though she had known from the beginning that he was there, silently witnessing a mystery neither grief nor reason could explain. Adrian did not sleep. The image of the bending candle and the scent of white roses lingered in his thoughts until dawn painted pale gold across the palace windows. He had spent years dismissing ghost stories as desperate inventions born from grief, yet what he had witnessed inside the nursery refused every logical explanation. More unsettling than the impossible flame was Elara's unwavering gaze. She had looked directly toward the hidden passage as though silence itself had whispered his presence to her. The sapphire pendant troubled him even more. It had belonged to Isabella. He remembered fastening the necklace around his wife's neck on their wedding day while she laughed beneath blooming cherry trees. After her death, the royal attendants had assured him the pendant vanished during the chaos surrounding the birth. Every search failed to recover it. He had eventually accepted that flames or thieves had claimed the treasured keepsake forever. Now it rested in Alara's hands. There could be no coincidence. Instead of confronting her immediately, Adrian chose patience. He ordered the palace archives opened. Dust-covered forgotten ledgers, servant registers, physicians' reports, and household journals untouched for years. Hour after hour he searched alongside the elderly steward, whose fading memory slowly awakened as familiar names emerged from brittle pages. Near sunset they uncovered a damaged incident report written 6 years earlier. The official record described a brief nursery fire caused by an overturned lantern shortly after the twins' birth. It claimed every servant escaped safely. It stated Duchess Isabella died peacefully from childbirth complications. The account felt strangely incomplete. Several pages had been removed. The missing sections left jagged tears along the binding. Adrian frowned. Who altered these records? The steward swallowed uneasily. I do not know, Your Grace. But someone wished parts of that night forgotten. The old man lowered his eyes. There were whispers. What whispers? That another servant entered the burning nursery after everyone believed it empty. Adrian's heartbeat quickened. No one ever reported such bravery. Because she disappeared before morning. Together they continued searching until the steward located an aging leather journal belonging to Margaret Ellis, the palace housekeeper who had died 3 winters earlier. Her careful handwriting filled hundreds of pages with daily observations. One entry had been stained by smoke, yet most remained legible. Adrian read slowly. Tonight heaven tested every soul beneath this roof. Fire swallowed the nursery moments after her Grace's final breath. The household panicked. Amid smoke and screams, one young maid ran inside after everyone else fled. She carried both infants through collapsing beams while shielding them beneath her own body. By the time the guards reached her, burning timber had crushed her throat. She survived, but no sound escaped her lips again. Before losing consciousness, the Duchess pressed her sapphire necklace into the brave girl's trembling hand and whispered one final plea. Protect my boys. Then our beloved Duchess departed this world. Adrian lowered the journal with shaking hands. The room blurred. His wife had entrusted their sons to someone he had never thanked. Someone history had erased. Someone now quietly tucked blankets around those very children every evening. Who was the maid? He asked. The steward searched another register. His weathered finger stopped beside a faded name. Ilara Ashcroft. Silence settled heavily between them. Every memory suddenly rearranged itself. The twins' instant trust. The mysterious pendant. The tenderness in Ilara's eyes whenever Isabella's name surfaced. None of it had been chance. She had carried them through fire before they were old enough to remember. Tears burned Adrian's eyes. For 6 years she had lived without recognition while he mourned the woman she had honored with unwavering devotion. His gratitude arrived painfully late. Yet another mystery remained unresolved. If Ilara had saved the boys alive, why had their condition worsened year after year despite the finest medical care? That question led Adrian toward the palace infirmary after midnight. Victor Hale's office stood empty. Inside, cabinets overflowed with polished bottles labeled in meticulous handwriting. Adrian searched carefully until one locked drawer resisted. Remembering the physician often hid valuables there, he forced the delicate lock with a letter opener. Several sealed letters lay beneath bundles of coins. One carried Seraphine's family crest. He unfolded it. Continue increasing the dosage each month. Their remaining sight must never return. Once dependency becomes permanent, the succession will no longer threaten our future. Payment awaits as promised. Adrian felt the floor disappear beneath him. He seized the bottles used on the twins. The ingredients listed harmless herbs. Yet hidden beneath the false labels sat another ledger documenting the actual mixture administered. A renowned apothecary's guide rested nearby. Adrian compared every ingredient. His hands began trembling uncontrollably. The medicine contained poisonous extracts known to damage delicate nerves inside the eye when consumed over long periods. The boys had never been beyond hope. Their blindness had been stolen. The realization struck harder than any battlefield wound. He remembered every evening Victor assured him improvement required patience. Every reassuring smile. Every grateful handshake. Every drop placed willingly into innocent eyes by a trusting father. He had unknowingly delivered suffering to his own children. The weight of guilt crushed his chest until breathing became difficult. Unable to bear the loneliness of his discovery, Adrian walked toward the nursery before sunrise. Ilara sat beside the sleeping twins repairing a torn sleeve with careful stitches. She looked up immediately. One glance told her something had changed. Without speaking, Adrian knelt before her. Words failed him. He removed the poison bottle from his coat and placed it upon the floor. His shoulders shook. "I failed them," he whispered hoarsely. "I failed all of you. I believed lies. I protected monsters." Elara stared at the bottle. Understanding filled her sorrowful eyes. She gently pushed it aside. Then she reached for Adrian's trembling hand. Instead of placing it in her own, she rested his palm over Leo's tiny heartbeat. The child stirred. Still asleep, he instinctively covered his father's hand with both of his. Elara guided Adrian's other hand toward Lucian's chest. Another steady heartbeat answered. Lucian smiled faintly without opening his eyes. The nursery remained perfectly silent except for the rhythm beneath Adrian's fingertips. "Wife. Oh, forgiveness." Leo slowly awakened. Hearing his father's uneven breathing, he reached upward until his fingers found Adrian's face. "You've been crying?" he murmured softly. Adrian could only nod. Leo smiled. "You still sound like home." Lucian opened sleepy eyes clouded by darkness and stretched both arms around his father's neck. "We waited," he whispered. "We knew you would come back." The embrace shattered the last walls surrounding Adrian's heart. He held both sons tightly while tears fell without restraint. Across the room, morning sunlight touched Elara's peaceful face. She offered no accusation, only compassion. For the first time since Isabella's death, Adrian understood that love could survive unimaginable loss without demanding repayment. It simply remained, watching, waiting, healing. Outside the nursery, unseen beyond the slightly open door, Lady Seraphine had heard enough to recognize disaster. Her elegant smile disappeared into something cold and desperate. She stepped silently backward before anyone noticed her presence, turned toward the shadowed corridor, and whispered to someone waiting beyond the staircase, "He knows everything now. If I cannot rule through the heirs, then by tomorrow there must be no heirs left alive." The palace awakened before sunrise to the thunder of boots echoing through marble corridors. Duke Adrian wasted no time after Seraphine's betrayal became clear. Loyal guards surrounded Dr. Victor Hale's chambers while royal messengers raced toward neighboring villages to summon renowned physicians. The Duke himself carried the poison bottles as evidence, refusing to let another lie survive the morning. Victor attempted calm denial, insisting the medicines followed ancient treatments, but the hidden letters and secret ledger shattered every excuse. Shackles replaced polished sleeves, and the physician who had once walked proudly through Blackwood Palace disappeared beneath armed escort, his frightened protests fading into silence. Seraphine, however, was nowhere to be found. Her chamber stood abandoned. Jewelry cases lay open. Wardrobes emptied. A rear stable gate hung slightly ajar. Adrian's heart tightened. He ran toward the nursery. The room was empty. A single toy horse rested upon the floor where Leo had left it the previous evening. The beds remained untouched, their blankets folded neatly. An open window allowed cool morning air to drift through fluttering curtains. Elara stood frozen beside the cradle. Her frightened eyes searched every corner before settling upon the tiny wooden whistle Leo always carried during garden walks. It lay broken beside the windowsill. She understood immediately. Someone had taken the boys. Adrian called every available guard. Search parties flooded forests, riverbanks, villages, and abandoned estates surrounding the duchy. Stable hands reported seeing Seraphine riding a black carriage shortly before dawn. One frightened groom remembered another rider accompanying her. Victor's former assistant. The fugitives had planned their escape carefully. Hours passed without success. Then one elderly groundskeeper approached Adrian with trembling urgency. "I saw carriage tracks," he whispered. "They lead toward the old royal chapel." Adrian's expression darkened. The abandoned chapel stood beyond the eastern woods, untouched since the terrible fire 6 years earlier. Most villagers avoided it, believing sorrow lingered within its scorched stone walls. If Seraphine sought isolation, no place offered greater secrecy. Without hesitation Adrian mounted his horse. Elara climbed behind him. Though unable to speak, her determined eyes revealed unwavering resolve. Together they rode through rain-soaked forests as storm clouds gathered overhead. Branches whipped against their faces. Wind howled through towering pines. Neither slowed. By late afternoon the ruined chapel emerged beyond tangled vines and blackened towers. Smoke curled lazily from broken windows. Someone was inside. Adrian dismounted before the horse fully stopped. He signaled soldiers to surround the building while he and Elara entered through shattered wooden doors. Inside, flickering lanterns cast uneasy shadows across cracked stone columns. Leo and Lucian sat bound beside the old altar. Despite ropes around their wrists, neither cried. Instead, both listened carefully, recognizing familiar footsteps long before anyone spoke. "Father," Leo whispered. Relief filled Adrian's heart. He rushed forward. A sharp voice halted him. "Another step and everything burns." Seraphine emerged from the shadows holding a lantern above scattered barrels of lamp oil. Her elegant gown was stained with mud, yet her proud posture remained unchanged. "You always chose them over me," she said bitterly. "The duchy should have been mine." "It was never yours," Adrian answered firmly. "It belongs to those willing to protect it." Seraphine laughed. "Then watch your precious heirs disappear." She hurled the lantern. Glass shattered. Oil ignited instantly. Flames raced across the ancient floor with terrifying speed. Dry beams overhead crackled. Smoke poured through the sanctuary. The guards surged forward, but collapsing timbers blocked every entrance. Seraphine vanished behind swirling fire, attempting escape through hidden passages. Adrian reached the twins only to discover heavy beams crashing between them. Burning debris trapped Leo and Lucian beneath a fallen support. The boys called desperately for their father. Heat became unbearable. Smoke blinded everyone. Soldiers shouted warnings that the roof would soon collapse. For one terrible heartbeat, Adrian hesitated. The flames reminded him of the night Isabella died. Fear tightened around memories he had buried for years. Then Alara moved. Without considering danger, she wrapped a damp cloak around herself and plunged into the burning sanctuary. Exactly as she had done 6 years earlier. Adrian watched in stunned disbelief before following immediately behind. Together they crawled beneath choking smoke. Alara reached Leo first, lifting the burning beam enough for Adrian to pull the child free. Splinters scorched her arms, but she ignored the pain. Lucian remained trapped beneath shattered stones. The ceiling groaned ominously. Another support cracked. Adrian struggled to move the rubble alone. Alara knelt beside him. Their eyes met. No words were needed. Together they pushed with every remaining ounce of strength. The stones shifted. Lucian slipped into Adrian's waiting arms just as the roof began collapsing. They sprinted toward daylight. Flaming beams crashed behind them. The moment their feet crossed the chapel threshold, the ancient sanctuary thundered inward, disappearing beneath roaring clouds of sparks and smoke. Outside, soldiers captured Seraphine attempting escape through the cemetery. She fought wildly until shackles closed around her wrists. Nearby, Victor's assistant surrendered without resistance, revealing hidden documents that confirmed years of conspiracy. Justice arrived at last. Yet Adrian scarcely noticed. He knelt beside Alara. Her sleeves had burned away. Red blisters marked her hands. Ash covered her face. Still, her first trembling gesture asked only one question. The twins? Leo and Lucian rushed into her embrace before Adrian could answer. All three clung together while gentle rain finally extinguished the last drifting embers. Weeks turned into months. New physicians from distant universities examined the twins with remarkable care. They immediately discarded Victor's poisonous medicines and began gentle treatments using healing herbs, nourishing diets, and carefully measured exercises designed to strengthen damaged eyes rather than weaken them further. Hope returned slowly. One bright autumn morning sunlight poured through the palace gardens where Alara guided the boys along familiar flower paths. Adrian watched nearby as Leo suddenly stopped walking. He lifted his face toward the warmth. Tears formed beneath clouded eyes. His voice trembled. "I can see something." Everyone froze. "What is it?" Adrian whispered. Leo smiled through tears. "Light." Days later Lucian pointed uncertainly toward the sky. "Blue?" he murmured. "I think that color is blue." The physicians explained their vision would never become perfect. Years of poison had stolen too much. Yet enough remained to restore fragments of sight with patience and time. Several weeks afterward, the brothers stood together in the palace courtyard awaiting another examination. As Alara approached carrying fresh bread from the kitchens, both boys turned toward her without guidance. Their eyes focused uncertainly, blinking against unfamiliar brightness. Slowly, wonder replaced confusion. Leo reached trembling fingers toward her smiling face, not because he needed touch to recognize her anymore, but because he wanted to join memory with miracle. Lucian laughed through joyful tears as Adrian stepped beside her, and for the very first time in their lives, the twins truly saw the two people who had carried them through darkness into hope. Winter surrendered gracefully to spring, and with each passing week Blackwood Palace became almost unrecognizable. Curtains that had remained closed for years were finally drawn open, allowing golden sunlight to flood halls once ruled by sorrow. Fresh flowers decorated every corridor. Musicians returned to the grand ballroom. Children laughed freely in the gardens, and servants no longer lowered their voices whenever Duke Adrian passed. The man who had once wandered the palace carrying invisible chains now greeted everyone with quiet kindness, while his greatest joy came not from governing the duchy but from walking beside Leo and Lucian as they discovered a world they had only imagined through sound, fragrance, and touch. Their eyesight improved steadily. The physicians had never promised miracles, only possibility, yet every month brought another blessing. Leo could distinguish faces across a room. Lucian could recognize the changing colors of sunrise reflected upon the palace lake. Neither possessed perfect vision, but they no longer measured life by what they lacked. Ilara had already taught them the greatest lesson of all, that true sight began inside the heart long before it reached the eyes. Although the kingdom celebrated the twins' recovery, no one admired the transformation more than Adrian himself. He often stood silently outside the schoolroom where Ilara guided the boys through lessons unlike those taught by noble tutors. She encouraged them to identify instruments by their melodies before learning their names. She blindfolded palace pages and invited them to navigate gardens by scent so they would understand their young masters instead of pitying them. Every lesson she created turned weakness into confidence and difference into strength. She never spoke a single word, yet everyone understood her. One quiet evening Adrian entered the palace library carrying several heavy books. He waited until Ilara noticed him before opening the first volume. It contained illustrations of hand signs. He smiled almost shyly. Then, carefully, awkwardly, he raised his hands. "Good evening." The signs were imperfect. His fingers hesitated. Several gestures appeared backward. Ilara stared in astonishment. She looked from his hands to the books, then back again. Adrian laughed softly at his own mistakes. "I wanted," he signed slowly, "to speak your language." For a heartbeat she remained perfectly still. Then tears overflowed. No one had ever tried. Not once during the 6 silent years since the fire had anyone considered learning the language that had become her only voice. She gently corrected one of his hand positions. He repeated the sign. She smiled. Again. He copied every movement with determined patience until both of them laughed together without a single spoken sound. From that evening onward the palace often witnessed remarkable conversations unfolding entirely through graceful hands and smiling eyes. Leo and Lucian insisted on learning as well. Within weeks the brothers were signing stories across the dinner table, inventing secret jokes only their family understood. Silence, once a symbol of loneliness, became another language of love. Months later invitations spread across the kingdom announcing the Festival of Renewal, a celebration honoring the survival of Blackwood's heirs and the restoration of hope throughout the duchy. Nobles arrived from distant provinces expecting magnificent speeches, military parades, and generous rewards for those who had served the ducal family during difficult years. The great ballroom shimmered beneath thousands of crystal candles. Musicians filled the air with joyful melodies. Long tables overflowed with fresh bread, orchard fruits, roasted feasts, and fragrant flowers gathered from every village surrounding the estate. Whispers passed eagerly through the guests. Everyone expected Adrian to reward Ilara with gold, land, jewels, or perhaps a noble title. No one imagined the truth. When the orchestra finished its final piece, Adrian rose from his seat. The hall fell silent. Instead of addressing the assembled nobles immediately, he walked across polished marble until he stood before Ilara. She looked up in gentle confusion. The twins exchanged knowing smiles but remained wonderfully quiet. Adrian reached into the inner pocket of his ceremonial coat. Slowly he withdrew the sapphire necklace. The same necklace Isabella had entrusted to Ilara during her final moments. Its brilliant blue stone reflected candlelight across the silent hall. Every noble recognized it instantly. Adrian carefully placed the necklace around Ilara's neck. His voice remained calm. "My late wife gave you this not as a possession but as a promise. You honored that promise beyond anything I deserved." He stepped backward. Then, before the astonished court, Duke Adrian Blackwood lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. No duke had knelt before a common woman within living memory. Adrian lifted his eyes to Ilara. Instead of speaking aloud, he raised both hands. His movements were no longer uncertain. Months of quiet practice had transformed awkward gestures into graceful conversation. Every sign carried confidence. Every motion revealed sincerity. My beloved, he sighed. You never tried to replace Isabella. You protected the family she loved. You saved our sons twice. You rescued my heart when I believed it had died beside hers. I cannot change the past, but I pray you will walk beside me into the future. Will you become my wife? No one in the ballroom breathed. Ilara's trembling hands slowly rose. She touched the sapphire resting above her heart before answering. I loved this family before anyone knew my name. I never expected anything. I only wanted them to live. She paused as tears shimmered upon her cheeks. Then her smile brightened like sunrise. Yes. Thunderous applause erupted throughout the hall. Many servants openly wept. Even battle-hardened guards wiped tears from weathered faces. Yet the most unforgettable moment had not arrived. Leo and Lucian stepped forward carrying two delicate flower crowns woven from white roses, lavender and forget-me-nots gathered that very morning from the palace gardens. Together they stood before Ilara. Leo gently placed the first crown upon her head. You never asked us to forget our mother. Lucian settled the second crown above the first. You helped us remember her with love instead of sadness. Leo looked toward the assembled court. People say she was our nurse. Lucian smiled. They are wrong. The brothers reached for Ilara's hands. Then, with voices filled with certainty rather than hesitation, they spoke together. She has always been our mother. Silence swept through the ballroom once more. Not the lonely silence that had haunted Blackwood Palace for years, but the sacred stillness that appears when every heart witnesses undeniable truth. Adrian rose to his feet and embraced all three together. For the first time since Isabella's passing, the family felt complete. Years unfolded gently after that remarkable evening. Adrian and Ilara ruled side by side, not through fear or privilege but through compassion that inspired every village within the duchy. Together they founded the House of Guiding Light, a royal sanctuary where blind, deaf, orphaned and abandoned children received education rooted in dignity rather than pity. Scholars traveled across kingdoms to study Ilara's extraordinary methods of teaching through music, texture, fragrance, rhythm, and trust. The palace that had once echoed with grief became a place where every child, regardless of ability, discovered purpose. Leo and Lucian matured into wise young men admired for their kindness above their titles. Their eyesight continued improving with careful treatment, yet they often closed their eyes during lessons, reminding younger students that understanding the world required more than vision alone. They guided frightened children through blooming gardens, encouraging them to identify flowers by fragrance, fountains by their melodies, birds by their songs, and friends by the kindness within their voices. Every lesson reflected the quiet wisdom Ilara had shared with them during those precious evenings beside a single candle. One golden afternoon Adrian stood beside Ilara beneath the oldest oak tree overlooking the gardens. Around them dozens of blind orphan children laughed as Leo and Lucian led them confidently along winding paths lined with lavender and roses. Music floated gently through the air while tiny hands explored tree bark, warm sunshine, flowing water, and blooming petals without fear. Adrian slipped his hand into Ilara's. Neither needed words. Together they watched the children who had once entered the world surrounded by darkness become guiding lights for countless others, proving that the greatest miracles were never born from magic, wealth, or power, but from quiet acts of courage repeated every single day. And in that peaceful garden, where love spoke more eloquently than any voice ever could, Blackwood was remembered forever not as the richest duchy in the kingdom, but as the kindest, because the children who had been born without sight became the light of an entire nation, and the silent woman who healed them finally received the voice she had never truly lost, for love had spoken through her all along.